Welcome. Glad that you are joining us for our video podcast. Now, if you're someone who wants the full service, who wants welcome and announcements, wants prayers, wants music, you want to go back to the YouTube page and click on the link that says full service. For those of you that are like, listen, I just kind of want the message, this is the place for you. A chance for us to learn more about how do we live our life with Jesus in the midst of all of life. And so we're glad that you are joining us. If you want to find out more information, go to our website and check it out and click on whatever links most interest you. We're so glad that you're joining us. We look forward to continuing to connect with you and engage with you. If you have questions, if you have suggestions, if you have things you'd like to ask us about, the best person to connect with is Leah. She is the one who would love to connect with you online in a way to help you grow in your faith wherever you are at. Well, thanks for joining us. Let's jump into this week's teaching. Welcome. So glad that you're joining us this week. If you've been watching us for a while, welcome back. If you are joining us for the very first time, let me get you caught up to speed. We are doing a series called Stand, and it's a series that continues to revolve around this pivotal question. What are you standing upon in life? Or put another way, what is the foundation of your life? Where do you get your sense of identity? What is your source of strength? What gives you hope and assurance in the midst of anything that you are facing in life? I believe that regardless of where you are in faith, whether you're someone who believes in God or you're still exploring who God is and what this even looks like, that this is a series for you, as it hopefully provides an opportunity for us to be honest with ourselves and to see, what is it that I believe, but then also, are my beliefs actually beginning to shape my behavior? So today, I want to land on the whole reality of courage. We all need courage in life, don't we? Like, courage is that ability, that strength to push us beyond into places where we may not naturally go on our own. That we like to be comfortable. We don't often want to face difficulties, but it's the courage that allows us to do what we couldn't do naturally. So not everything in life needs courage. Like when you eat that second piece of pie after dinner, that doesn't take courage. There are moments in life that I would call those sweaty palm moments that your heart begins to beat, it starts to race a little bit quicker, and you are stepping into something beyond what is natural and normal for you. Let me give you an example from my life. A number of years ago, our family, along with a couple other families, went camping up in northern Ontario near Sudbury at Grundy Lake. And one of the amazing things about Grundy Lake is they have different levels of cliffs that you can jump off to into the water. And so we thought one afternoon, hey, this would be a great idea. Let's go cliff jumping. And they have like a 10-foot cliff. They have like a 15, 20-foot cliff. And then they have like a 35, 40-foot cliff. And I remember we went and we all kind of, eased into it a little bit. We jumped off the first cliff and then a fewer people jumped off the second cliff. And then we started to look at the third cliff. And you get to the edge and you look over and you're like, this is a little bit beyond what I want to do. Well, I got caught up in the moment and I threw it out there. I said, hey, if any of the kids do it, I will do it. Well, wouldn't you know it? One of the kids literally just runs and jumps off the cliff into the water, 35 feet. And I'm thinking, this is not good. Those of you who don't know me, I'm afraid of heights. And so even getting up to the edge of this cliff was not something I was comfortable with. Like, this was a sweaty palm moment. Like I'm sweaty right now just even thinking about it. But I knew I said I needed to do it. And so a number of the kids did it. And then my youngest, who was 8 at the time, Canaan, he wanted to do it. And Rebecca, my wife, said, he's not doing it, Joel, until you get into the water. So I was given my marching orders. So this is one of those jumps where you couldn't just kind of run off and fall in. You had to actually jump so you wouldn't hit the rock face going down. And I remember that may have been the greatest moment of intense prayer in my life. I run, I jump, arms flailing, screaming, and I'm like, please God save me, please God save me, please God save me. You hit the water and then you go down deep and you're like, am I ever going to come up? Well, finally I surfaced. I was so thankful. And then my 8-year-old jumped off. No big deal to him. And he's like, that was so much fun, Dad. Let's do it again. And I'm like, I'm done. I'm done. Now, you're probably sitting there thinking, all right, you know what? Are you embellishing? This actually happened? Well, we have footage of one of the kids that was with us, Noah, who took the plunge. So check it out and you decide. So there you go. Like that's a legitimate, you're hanging in the air for 3 to 4 seconds. Like that is legit. It took tremendous courage. In the midst of life, maybe it's not cliff jumping, but there's times where you know that you need courage to take the necessary steps. But have you ever considered how important courage is when it comes to our relationship with God? Have you ever considered that it takes courage to follow Jesus? Because there are going to be times where he is going to nudge us. He is going to call us to step into places in life that we would not naturally go on our own. Or have you ever considered that it takes courage in the midst of the difficulties of life to trust that God is still with you? As I think about faith, as I think about my relationship with God, I realize that courage is so important. And so today, I want to focus on courage, on why it is so necessary, and how God is ultimately the one who gives us the courage to step into these difficult places. And to kind of help guide the conversation, we're going to jump back into the story of Daniel. Again, if you're just joining us, Daniel's story is told in the Old Testament. And so this is prior to the birth of Jesus. And Daniel comes at a time when God's people are in a difficult place. They have been conquered by the Babylonians. Their cities and homes have been destroyed. The temple has been completely ransacked. And the majority of them have been taken off into exile, where they are placed in circumstances where they will be removed from their Jewish identity and hopefully begin to give up on their trust and faith in God. And it's here that we begin to see, through the life of Daniel, faith lived out. Well, today we're going to learn from 3 of his friends, 3 guys named Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Maybe familiar, maybe not. But here's the circumstance. The king of Babylon, King Nebuchadnezzar, is an irrational individual. And he really has no time for God, that he wants all the focus to be upon him. And so in chapter 3, he erects a 96-foot high statue made of gold. And he declares that at the sound of any music, people must bow down and worship. And if you don't, you literally get burned to death. You get thrown into the furnace. Our tech guy thought it would be great for me to hang out by a furnace in the midst of this story. So I am like literally sweating to death. So I can appreciate what this story is all about. But it's in this moment that we begin to see a step of courage that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego took, because they refused to bow down. They understood that their faith and belief in God, if he was their foundation, that it must shape their behavior. And they knew that they were not going to bow down. They were not going to give allegiance to anyone but God. Now, they didn't go out and announce it to the world, but guess what? There were tattletales around. People saw that when the music was played, everyone else was bowing down, and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego were still upright. So they told the king, and the king was none too happy. Let's jump into the story right here to see what happens next. We're going to turn to Daniel chapter 3, beginning with verse 13. We're told that then Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage and ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought before him. When they were brought in, Nebuchadnezzar said to them, Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you refuse to serve my gods or to worship the gold statue I have set up? I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I have made when you hear the sound of the musical instruments. But if you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. And then what God will be able to rescue you from my power? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up. Can you imagine standing before the king, the most powerful man, who's giving you a second chance and still having the courage to say, we will not bow down. We will not serve your gods. We will serve and worship our God, not yours. What a step of courage. And I so appreciate what they said, that God had the ability to save them, but even if he doesn't, that would still not change their mind. When I think of their courage, their faith, their ability to trust in God, two things immediately strike me. The first one is how significant their belief, their convictions shaped their behavior. Listen, it's easy to believe in God when it doesn't come at a cost. But suddenly when the stakes are raised and something is required of you, that's when courage is necessary. Like, think about it for a moment. It could have been so easy for these three to start to compromise, to start to rationalize. Like, listen, we don't want to be too extreme. Listen, this king is crazy. He's irrational. Like, we're just gonna bow down, but we're not really going to mean it, because at the end of the day, God knows our hearts, and we want to play the end game. Right? Like, if we want to be a witness to others, if we want to live long lives and we want to have an impact for the kingdom, then maybe we shouldn't take this step right now. We should compromise. You know, one of the dangers of compromise is it begins to erode our foundation. Because if they don't stand up for their faith here, then what about when the next opportunity comes? It could easily begin to rationalize it away as well. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego understood that courage will often require a cost, that they had to take a step of faith. The second thing is that I realized that their courage reminded me that they did not have a transactional relationship with God. Transactional is a sense of this idea of, well, God, I'm going to do this for you, and you better do this for me. That, God, if we're going to put our necks on the line for you, then you better step up and save us or change the king's mind or do something. But even in their conversation with the king, they indicated no such thing. They said, we believe that our God can save us, but even if he chooses to not, we will not bow down. Talk about courage. So I don't know, if maybe you've never heard this story before, you're sitting there thinking, okay, pins and needles, like what exactly happened? Well, let's jump back in. We see this in verse 19. It says, Nebuchadnezzar was so furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face became distorted with rage. He commanded the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than usual. Then he ordered some of the strongest men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So they tied them up and threw them into the furnace, fully dressed in their pants, turbans, robes, and other garments. And because the king in his anger had demanded such a hot fire in the furnace, the flames killed the soldiers as they threw the 3 men in. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, securely tied, fell into the roaring flames. But suddenly Nebuchadnezzar jumped in amazement and exclaimed to his advisors, Didn't we tie up 3 men and throw them into the furnace? Yes, your majesty, we certainly did, they replied. Look, Nebuchadnezzar shouted, I see 4 men, unbound, walking around in the fire unharmed, and the 4th looks like a god. Then Nebuchadnezzar came as close as he could to the door of the flaming furnace and shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come out. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped out of the fire. Then the high officers, officials, governors, and advisors crowded around them and saw that the fire had not touched them. Not a hair on their heads was singed, and their clothing was not scorched. They didn't even smell of smoke. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, Praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel to rescue his servants who trusted in him. They defied the king's commands and were willing to die rather than serve or worship any god except their own. This is truly one of those jaw-dropping moments in the Bible, that these 3 men chose to take a courageous stand, and God delivered them. But there's 2 rather important things that we note. The first one is this 4th figure in the fire. I mean, the king was kind of like rubbing his eyes. He couldn't believe what he saw. He even asked his advisors. He's like, wait a second. We threw 3 and now I see 4. What is going on? Now, scholars will debate a little bit. Some believe that it would have been an angel of God. Others believe that it was Jesus himself prior to his incarnation. Regardless of where you land on this, the reality is the same. That this was the visible presence of God with them. The second thing is that these 3 men were not harmed at all. Like, look at the details. Like, not only were they not burned or singed, but when they came out of the furnace, they didn't even smell like fire. I mean, we had a campfire about a week ago, and the smell of smoke is still in the jacket that I was wearing. Like that reality. Like, I just love that fine detail that God was putting upon this. But it's in this moment, that 4th person, the presence of God, that I believe we learn one of the greatest principles that will enable us to step out in courage, to trust God courageously in the midst of life, because this is a life-changing truth that was not only true for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but is true for you and for me. And it's simply this, that God is always with us in the fire. At times in the midst of difficulties of life, we may wonder, God, are you present? God, where are you? God, why are you allowing this to happen to me? If you're someone who is new to the faith or perhaps exploring faith, you need to understand that following Jesus does not make you immune to the difficulties and the fires of life. Actually, there's going to be times where life is going to become more difficult because of your faith in Him and because of the places He's calling you to go. And there's going to be times that God may not deliver you out of the fire, but He'll walk with you through the fire. So often we think that God will deliver us and not allow us to step into these difficult places, but so often we see God with us in the midst of it all. And I know from personal experience that often the greatest reality, the greatest reminder of God's presence with me is in the fires of life. So what's our takeaway? As we began on courage, it takes courage to have faith, because there's going to be times where Jesus calls us to step into moments of life that we would not naturally go on our own. It takes courage to trust that God is with us in the midst of the fires of life. And so when you have those sweaty palm moments, those times where Jesus is calling you into difficult places, will you have the courage not to compromise, not to be silent, not to be quiet, but to allow your belief to shape your behavior? Or perhaps right now, you're in the midst of one of those fires of life. It could be financial. It could be physical. It could be relational. I don't know your circumstance, but you do, and so does God. It takes courage to trust and to believe that God is with you. Even though he may not deliver you, he is walking with you through the fire of life. Putting your faith in Jesus requires courage. There's going to be times where we may be uncertain, even fearful. But this is so important to know. Courage does not mean the absence of fear. Courage says, even when I'm fearful, I will still step through. And so what about you? How do we begin to allow this sense of courage, this reality of God to take grip of our lives? When we stand upon him, how do we act courageously? We jump into the New Testament, the book of Hebrews, probably written about 700 years after the incident of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the furnace. Hebrews chapter 11 is one of the great chapters in the Bible because it's what's often referred to as the Faith Hall of Fame. If you want a quick recap of all the amazing individuals who stood courageously for God, read Hebrews chapter 11. Because in it, in about verse 34, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are mentioned, although not by name. And it's in this that we are reminded how we can draw courage from God. Hebrews 11:34 says this, by faith, they quenched the flames of fire, refusing to turn from God to be set free. They placed their hope in a better life after the resurrection. So how do we act courageously for God? How do we step out in faith in times where it may make us uncomfortable? Or how do we trust that God is at work with us even in the midst of the fires of life? It's all about focus. The writer of Hebrews said because they focused upon the hope of the resurrection. You know, unknown to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego was the even greater reality of the presence of God in Jesus. Why can we act courageously in life? Because Jesus went into the fire for you and me. He faced death through a cross for our benefit. But beyond that, he rose from the grave. And the New Testament tells us that the same power that rose Jesus from the grave lives in us. So how do we stand courageously? By knowing that God is with us because of Jesus in the middle of the fire. And the same power that brought Jesus out of the fire and rose to life is the same power that is available to us when we are in the midst of the difficulties of life. So wherever you are, if you're a follower of Jesus, may you be willing to stand courageously for him. If you're in the midst of a fire, may you know that Jesus is walking with you in the midst of it. Or if you're someone that perhaps has not taken that step of faith, that you're trying to muster the strength and the courage from within, it doesn't need to be this way. Jesus wants to come alongside you, to be your source of courage, to enable you to take a stand in the midst of life. And so we're going to conclude with a song that again really speaks to this reality. And then I'm going to invite you to come back because we are going to celebrate communion together. Maybe communion is something that is foreign to you or you wonder why we do it. Communion reminds us again to place our focus back on Jesus so that we can be courageous, that we can take a stand for him, and that we can trust that he is with us in the midst of all of life. And so I hope you'll join us.